Well, this section is really focused on protecting from threats, and the technologies that we do use for that are, of course, our SIEM tools and our XDR tools. But to set the context, I'm sure everybody knows the context because, frankly, it's been front of center for security professionals, but also CEOs around the world. With the combination of the nation state attacks we've experienced, this example being Nobelium, and also the many ransomware attacks that are in flight over the last 6 months. Super top of mind topic for everybody. So I want to make sure we share what we do to help our customers prevent these attacks and move forward. One point I do want to make on SolarWinds, not necessarily going through each is that it's no longer sufficient to protect an individual resource. Attackers think in graphs. They don't think in straight lines. They'll go find the easiest way into your organization. And if that's, borrowing somebody's identity or phishing through email or brute forcing a virtual machine, whatever it is, they'll go do it. And then they'll laterally move across your system. And so fundamentally, there's a trail here that you can see in this particular attack that spans email, endpoints, identities, and applications. And as a defender, your job is to understand and, of course, shut down this pattern. And to do that, you also need to take data from all of these four systems and bring it together. And historically, that's been really hard because, most of the security teams I know have a tool to protect their email, a tool to protect their endpoints, a tool to protect their identities, and may or may not have tools, frankly, for some of the other areas based on coverage. In particular, cloud infrastructure being relatively new is an area that not every security team has invested in tools. And that model just doesn't work anymore in today's world. In fact, it probably never worked, but it's obviously involved a lot of manual work for people threading things together. And with the volume and sophistication of attacks these days, manual effort is just not a way to do it. So you need an automated solution to do that. And so our vision is really in empowering SecOps and driving efficiency in SecOps so that you can focus on the important things, evicting bad actors, for example. And also, of course, setting up the environment correctly in the first place with the right security best practices. This is not all about the response aspect. It's about the full life cycle. And we do that inside a vision which we call our SIEM and XDR vision. We have this notion that there are SIEM tools and there are XDR tools, and various vendors in the market, frankly, depending on where they started, think that their SIEM is the answer to the problem, or think that their XDR is the answer to the problem. And, perhaps describing why the other tool is not a useful way forward. Microsoft's kind of approach to this is to embrace the best of both worlds. And so there's great value that comes from SIEM tools. There's great value that comes from XDR tools. We just happen to have enough resources that we can build both of those things and integrate them together into a deeply integrated solution, which at the end of the day means that your security professionals have more context around alerts as incidents than they would have before. And then also have a far more comprehensive view left to right across the organizational infrastructure in terms of what you're protecting, which is, of course, the fundamental digital transformation and business of your business. And it's obvious, perhaps, to say this, but because we're doing SIEM and XDR, this is not about protecting Microsoft stuff by any means. This is about protecting your entire organization, every single piece of it, from Linux to Windows to Android to Mac to iOS to SAP to Fortinet to integrating with your favorite security tools, even if they aren't Microsoft. Of course, we can take in data from CrowdStrike and Proofpoint and whomever else. So our vision here is extensive in terms of the full level of protection, integrating with the security ecosystem and what is your end user environment ecosystem and what is your cloud ecosystem. And once again, not just restricted to Azure by any means, AWS and GCP. There's legacy misperceptions on that. Yes, Microsoft is a platform vendor. We sell Windows, but at the same time, we're a security vendor. And as a security vendor, you are not in business if you don't protect the entire environment. And that's absolutely what we do here. When we do that, we do it in cloud native solutions, which obviously help customers from an efficiency perspective in terms of getting set up. Fundamentally, as I said, we do that across the full life cycle. So we're not here just to do the detection and response. We can do a lot to help imposter and set up in these various platforms with things like we have this thing called Secure Score, which is a set of posture recommendations based on learnings that we have from threats, of course, such that you set up your environment correctly. How that looks pictorially in the brands that are for the services that we sell effectively. Our SIEM tool is called Microsoft Sentinel. It is the command and control tool for SecOps. It gives you visibility across the entire organization, and it has the flexibility that you need in terms of querying as traditional, but it has a lot of AI built into it to really help correlate all of those data sets that I was just describing into a clear view of the kill chain, and ensure that you have a clear understanding of who's being attacked. And we'll drill into these three tools in quite a bit more detail in a minute. So the Sentinel is your end-to-end tool. All third-party data, in fact, if I just build this slide out, third-party data comes in through Sentinel through connectors. At the bottom of the slide, we have XDRs. And so where Sentinel is comprehensive and it covers everything, our XDR is actually pretty comprehensive for an XDR. But why we call something an XDR is because we have a specific, very deep understanding of a specific resource. We know that resource is a Windows endpoint, and we know the most important attacks on a Windows endpoint. Same on an iOS endpoint, same on an Android endpoint, same on AWS. And so we have this deep contextual understanding of these specific resources. And we use that deep contextual understanding to auto remediate on occasions when incidents happen, so that the SecOps doesn't need to worry about it. We've already fixed it. And we also use that specific context to then determine which of these pieces of data, in terms of this massive volume of alerts that's going in the system, are the most important ones to correlate together to put in front of security operations. Because as you all know, security operations is absolutely flooded with data and spends far too much of your time on false positives. And so the more that we can do up front with the XDR, deeply understanding each of these resources to find the needle in the haystack that is that Nibalium attack or the ransomware attack, and avoid spending lots of time filtering through false positives, is a far better place to be. I'm thrilled that customer adoption of these technologies has been very strong, and analysts such as Forrester and Gartner recognize us. You can see we're a leader in the Forrester XDR wave. In fact, we're one of only 2 leaders, the other one being Trend. And then, of course, in the security analytics platform, which is Forrester's word for SIEM, we are also a leader with a number of vendors in that case, with a product that was at that point a couple of years in the market. And we're happily working with our analysts on the next version of these waves as we speak. As it turns out, you'll see a Gartner SIEM wave coming shortly again, and another endpoint wave, for example. So enough on that. Let's dive a little bit deeper into Sentinel. So once again, our SIEM tool. And when I think about it from a value perspective, there's really 4 values that are important. And I'm going to drill into each of these at turn. So let's go straight to it. The first is harnessing the power of a cloud SIEM. Your grandfather's SIEM was an on-premises SIEM. It was constrained by a NAS and a set of infrastructure at the back end that couldn't possibly manage the volume of data that comes in when you and not just cover your on-premises environment, but also cover your cloud environments, both your multi-cloud infrastructure, Google, AWS, GCP, but also things like your Office 365 environment. So super constrained. It really, Sentinel really eliminates all of that. All of those storage and setup issues are gone because it's on Azure is what it's built on top of. And it fundamentally is turned on by doing, file new Sentinel, and you can be up and going in a weekend. In fact, one of my customers, the CISO of ASOS, who CISO shouldn't be setting up SIEM tools, you would think, right? But the CISO of ASOS literally set up Sentinel one weekend because he was curious, and off he went. And he's one of my bigger customers to date. It was that easy for him to get started. Cloud also helps dramatically, as you'd imagine, when you're in the world we all are. I'm in my living room. And so being able to access Sentinel from the cloud is been really, really powerful in the last 24 months as well. Of course, one of the other big benefits of being in the cloud is that you have a dynamic storage model. And so, for example, if you're in the middle of an attack, you can spin up the amount of usage that you need to go and get more detailed understanding and queries and correlate data. And if you're not, then you can spin it down. So there's an opportunity to optimize the way that you manage your budget, and not be limited in the case of a big attack like you might be for on-premises. So cloud is an important piece, but not just cloud native. Unlike some other vendors, you don't have to forward a ticket to another vendor because they have an IaaS based architecture, a traditional VM based architecture. Everything that we build is built on a platform as a service that has inherent scalability in it. And one of the huge advantages of that is the detection piece. And obviously the detection piece is really built on two fundamental things. One is the quality of threat intelligence that goes through the system. And Microsoft is, frankly, second to none in terms of threat intelligence diversity. Every day at Microsoft, there are attackers. So it sounds funny to say, but every day there are attackers that are going after Xbox, that are going after Office 365, that are going after our Windows 365 environments, that are going after Dynamics. And all of that, of course, we're protecting with our 3,500 or more security professionals on a daily basis. And what they are doing is then getting the threat intelligence from all of those attacks and putting it into our product systems. So our systems have a deep understanding of all of those attacks. And so we have a really strong inside out view, if you want to think about it that way. Of course, agents, where we have agents, for example, on our endpoints, although our agent's actually built into Windows, so it's not really an agent for Windows 10. But for other operating systems, our agents, of course, collect a ton of threats. That goes into the threat intelligence. And then more recently, we bought a company that was a leader in outside-in threat intelligence called RiskIQ. And so RiskIQ really has complemented our inside-out view of threat intelligence. What they did is map the entire internet from the outside in, and have a deep understanding of attacker infrastructure. So, if you get an IP address pop up in a Sentinel, you can find out very quickly that IP address is a Cobalt Strike server, and the infrastructure that IP address is running to attack you, and 5 other IP addresses that might be also part of that same Cobalt Strike attack that you should shut down straight away. So perhaps there was a lot of detail, but the net of it is we have world-leading threat intelligence. And when we share the statistics for how many authentications that we get and push back on a daily basis, it's mind-blowing. It's literally billions and billions and billions of authentications and security events that we are filtering through to get the threat intelligence. You've also seen, of course, as recently as yesterday, actually, we have a very active team of folks who are actively hunting bad actors around the world, including everything up to taking people through court of law, working through takedowns and the like. And so contributing not just to Microsoft's growth, but to the broader safety of the overall world is a critical piece of the role that we play.
I've looked at it before, used it. You said before it's so easy, you can hit file, start, and it's going to start running.
Yeah.
But as I've worked with a lot of different products, even just in Office 365, and Intune and other products like that, getting the data is not always as easy. Is there any work going on with even just Microsoft, with other groups in Microsoft, to make it easier to ingest that data?
Yeah, it's a great point. So to your point, the hardest part of using a SIEM tool is often getting all of the data into the SIEM tool. And there are, many, many different connectors, hundreds of connectors now that exist in Sentinel, that we recently actually put in a solution gallery to make it super easy for people to find and set up and configure. And we feel really good about the number of connectors that we've built over that 2-year period. We'll continue to build connectors, of course. That's a kind of a never-ending journey. In terms of the simplicity, and one of the big advantages we have of Microsoft is, of course, if you want to get stuff in from Defender for Endpoint or Defender for Identity or the various other, either Microsoft 365 Defender or Defender for Cloud resources, then we own all of those platforms. And we've made it extremely simple, just a couple of clicks, to transfer your data from those platforms back into Sentinel. So it's very, very easy on the Microsoft platforms where we've done the work for you because we own the platform, but we also own Sentinel. There is no doubt there is work required in connectors when you're parsing syslogs to find specific information. If you need to build your own connector, we're working on codeless connectors and other things to innovate. So you're totally right that a ton of work in any SIM tool, and it is still an important part of the work stream for Sentinel, is connecting in data. But we've absolutely done what we can to simplify that, particularly for the Microsoft properties where we can just one tick click it.
I have a question regarding third-party integration. You said you had already a couple of those. The problematic thing is what I've often seen, if you have a 100% cloud solution, to get some legacy data in. Often these are kind of security sensitive because, yeah, they are maybe old, unpatched, and so on. So now you need to write up parsers. You need somehow to transport this. It's a common problem. It resolves. So can you give us some backgrounds? What are the Microsoft efforts for getting kind of legacy data into a structured format and then get this into Sentinel?
Yeah, exactly. So, many of those systems do syslog or Ceph. And so you can use syslog or Ceph. That's a very common approach. You can certainly build your own parsers. As I mentioned, we're working on a quote unquote codeless connector that would help. There are just some examples. Also, while I'm talking about data, one of the things that you often want to do is transform data before you move it into Sentinel. So you kind of hit on maybe there's data like a social security number that you don't want to put into Sentinel for some reason, and you want to keep it at the data source. And so we recently added a set of filtering technologies so that you can filter and transform that data up front before you put it into Sentinel. So it gets uploaded to the cloud and then it gets sorted as it gets moved forward. But yeah, you have a number of options to go do that work for sure.
And just because you mentioned it, will there be a method to get offline data? So a typical case is you have a system that is air gapped, yeah? Now you need to grab this data somehow with an agent in most cases, and then transport it to wherever your SIM collector is, in Sentinel case in the cloud. Do you have kind of such an mid-server or agent that you can use for that use case?
So obviously, 100% air-gapped environments don't work with the cloud. So if you're 100% air-gapped, then I don't have a great answer for you. For environments where you can have a chamber in the middle, so to speak, then today we don't have an agent that we provide ourselves that does that work. There's a number of other third-party integrations. For Logstash would be one of them, where you can use as an intermediary point as you move forward. It's certainly something that we've heard, and I think something that you can expect us to do in the future. But today our data transformation is at the cloud, and certainly we do want to extend it to the on-premises piece as well. And once again, we have customers today using things like Logstash as a forwarder in between.
Yeah, just to give you a feedback, I think this is something that a lot of the other competitors from Microsoft have, and would be great if you can offer also a solution for that in the future if you add this to your portfolio.
Appreciate it. Always looking to learn and grow in terms of customer feedback, and that's just a phenomenal request. Certainly we've heard that, and it is on the backlog, so awesome stuff.
Could you do a quick tick off of what are the formats and streams that you can send directly to Sentinel, and is there or is there not a offline non-real-time way to import data that you have stored somewhere else? And if so, in what formats does it have to be in to ingest it?
Yeah, so I couldn't give you the full list off the top of my head because I'd be at more than 200 different connectors. Palo, Fortinet, SAP, I could go on and on and on. I should have put a slide in this deck that has the 200 of them. If you search on the web for Sentinel connectors, there's a page that's rather long and poorly formatted at this point because it has a large number of connectors, and in the product it has it. In terms of offline, as I said before, the key there is integration with a third-party open source component at this point, such as Logstash. And as we move forward, it's on our backlog, so we will likely get to it at some point. I shouldn't be making forward-looking promises, but we've heard it before. So moving to investigation, one of the big things, often there's skepticism, frankly, amongst us security professionals in terms of the value AI. once you put all your data in the cloud, the computing that we can do on AI is really substantial to help. And so we've seen that the use of AI has really dramatically reduced false positives. And fundamentally, the AI that we have builds what we call incidents. So instead of alerts, Scott did an impossible travel because he's in New Zealand, where I'm from, and Romania, where my wife's from, at the same time. That's an alert. But Scott did an impossible travel and then logged into a machine for the first time, and then a suspicious process was dropped. That's an incident. And so we use AI to build that incident, and that AI in that particular case takes a piece of identity information, takes a piece of device or endpoint information. In fact, in that case, 2 pieces of device information, and brings it together in an incident. And that's really where the power is. And then we visualize that in, for example, the view that you see at the right, which makes it a whole lot easier in 2 dimensions. One is we're showing you incidents, which means there's a lot less of them. And then secondly, we're visualizing it so you can actually see the path of attack, the kill chain, as you move further forward. And this is really, really a big step function change for many folks who spend a lot of time, more time hunting than they do visualizing. You can certainly hunt in Sentinel, but the visualization is important. And just to put that in real terms, within Microsoft in a single month, December a year ago, I think, so this data is now out of date by year, so these numbers will be much higher. But in our systems, we had 300 billion identity logins. We had 4.1 billion, I told you there was a lot of logins, Office 365 logins. We had 3.2 billion Azure logins. And we put that data through Sentinel. And we identified 28 million identity detections, so still an impossible number for a human to be able to deal with. 20 million anomalous, I won't read all of them. You can see a bunch of large millions detections. And then we put it through our machine learning process and identified the highest priority 320 cases. And then we ran a second view on our machine learning and hit on 18 cases. It would have been very hard in those 300 plus billion raw events on the left-hand side to find those 18 cases, probably impossible. But with Sentinel and AI, now the SecOps team has those 18 cases right in front of them as the highest prioritized incidents. They span identity, device, application, and they can drill in and solve it. So this is a really big value. We actually have a component in Sentinel where SecOps tells us, was the case that you created or incident valuable when you close it? And more than 90% of the time, our customers, when they close that incident, say, yep, this wasn't a false positive. Yep, this was valuable, which is extremely heartwarming, because that's the goal when you're doing this work, is making sure you're putting the most important work in front of folks.
This looks really neat, and I love the use of what we'll call machine learning. But anytime we're reducing false positives, we're also reducing false negatives.
Yep.
You guys track that and have metrics around what that looks like?
Yes, exactly. So we're forever looking at, security is not this is always uncomfortable to say, but there's no mathematical proof to security, as you folks know, as the experts. And so you're always learning. In particular, when a new piece of ransomware comes in, the first question is, did our existing models catch that new piece of ransomware? Because we actually have machine learning models now that will not just get understanding from legacy ransomware that we've documented in the model, but will also speculate that this new thing is actually a new strain of ransomware and shut it down. And if we don't succeed, obviously then we very quickly go into our models and update it with a new data set, so all of our customers are protected. But then also look at the models and try and understand how we should adopt new fixes or changes to those models to continue to evolve. This is not a mathematical sport, it's a war game. And so we are continually working to adjust our models based on the data inputs through the system. We have a whole team that's working with this data set to continue to evolve it over time. Just as a total aside, and there's an attack on Active Directory that is called a shark tooth attack. And why is it a shark tooth? Because there's a graph, and when you see this particular pattern in the graph, it means we have a problem. Nobody really knew why for a while, but when we saw the attack pattern, we're like, okay, we got a problem, and our model has this, shark tooth logic in it. So there's a lot of empirical learnings here, both at the Sentinel level, but also, as I just described, because we own all these resources like Azure Active Directory and so on, we also have very deep knowledge and understanding of the resources and can apply the same logic there as well.
So just to finish this slide here, you ended up with 18 cases. So when your team did the investigation of those 18 cases, were they all definitely positives then? Were they classified correctly?
In this particular case, all of them were 100% correct. And once again, on average, 9 out of 10 of them are correct. So on average, 16 out of 18 would be correct. And if you go back to your, SOC dashboard, ask yourself 16 out of 18 times when I went and investigated something, was it worth my time? More often than not, we find that number's more like 50% industry-wide. So this is a big change.
And the 320, how many did you have time to investigate, and what was your success rate on those?
It's a good question. The team did that work. I don't know the data on the 320 because it's actually similar to the question that was just asked, which is, of the 320, how many should have been in the 18? Does that make sense? Should have there been 19 or should have there been 20? And the team absolutely is doing that work. I don't have the data at my fingertips in terms of how many were there, but they absolutely look at both levels of that to determine the right distribution. Yeah.
If a new vulnerability comes out, your team sees it. How long does it take until you have that integrated into Sentinel and it starts to throwing alarms for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, so if it's a new attack, then the first thing we need to do is actually understand the attack. So, take Nobelium was super sophisticated. It may have taken us and FireEye, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but maybe it was 24 to 48 hours to actually understand what was going on, because that was very sophisticated. And then once we had done that, we built an article, effectively some immediate guidance for customers in terms of, if you have Defender for Endpoint, here is a setting that you can do straight away, and updated our tools at the same time. That would be a long lead time, if that makes sense, because that one was a puzzle that we had to work through. It was honestly very sophisticated, and the industry learned from that one. For easier ones, as soon as we get that information, it's just going straight into the tool from the security analyst. So it's one of the big advantages of us owning, the left to right infrastructure here, is there's not, work through a company to put things into a tool. The analysts that are using Sentinel every day are also improving Sentinel.
Just to hear a bit from the inside, once you have this IOC, does this more or less at the same time into Defender, into Sentinel? Is this all pushed out in parallel, or is one tool kind of the lead here from Microsoft where you have the first detections?
It's not so much a tool as the lead, in the sense of it depends on where the attack comes from. And so if the best place to find it quickly is Defender, then which is often the case, then great. If it's an identity attack, then it's something else, and we push it on Active Directory. We have a pool of, think of it as a pool of threat intelligence that is then used by our products in the back end and directed as appropriate, if that makes sense. And so there's analysts in the back end updating a big data set, and that data set creates a pipeline. And then when a product like Sentinel, when you run AI on top of it, it goes and looks, it takes a piece of data and matches it against that threat intelligence pipeline and says, aha, we found a vulnerability, or we found an attack specifically that matches the pipeline. That's how it all sits together. So there is a broad pool of threat intelligence that is shared across the product set.
How is with historical data? So you become now aware of a new IOC. Yeah. Do you do also retro perspective for that in the data that you have already collected?
Yeah, so if I answer that from a customer perspective, because we had some interesting news there recently. So customers, for regulatory compliance reasons, or because some of these attacks are long latency, need to store data often for longer than a relatively short period of time. And when it comes to storing that data, the value of that data goes down over time, but it's not zero. And so one piece of feedback we had was, hey, can we have an ability to archive data at a lower cost for storage? Because obviously storing data costs money. And we recently introduced an archiving layer to Sentinel at a significantly lower price point, so that the customer can store data actually up for 7 years, which I think is an industry leading thing, in an archive sense, and then pull that data back from an archive into live, and go run queries on it at any point. If there is an issue that there was a latent attacker for a period of time, and now I really want to understand when they came into my system, I can roll back and work that through.
Okay, just out of curiosity, how long does it take to then get this data onboarded and make it searchable again?
Yeah, good question. Actually, searchable is the right term, because we also have a notion of basic logs, just to go sideways a little bit, and I'll answer your question. So we have the logs that you can do full analytics on top of with query language based stuff. And then we have the notion of literally searching at massive volume on relatively low latency. And so, for instance, if you had NetFlow logs that tend to be very noisy, but occasionally you need them in investigations, maybe you don't want to store them in a fancy log analytics database. Maybe you need a basic log database. And you're willing to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes for a result on those for the trade-off of the economics benefit of paying less to store the data. And so this searching aspect is, it can be a 5 to 10 minute thing to bring back super legacy data. Once again, a 5 to 10 minute thing, as opposed to rolling stuff off a tape in the old days, or the other technology systems, is actually a very short period of time, but it's not as real time as if it's in the log analytics system, for sure.
That sounds amazing. So back in the days, that was often weeks until you had the data ready and actually find something. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's a huge breakthrough for many SOC teams. And actually, it was back to the unmet need on the agent on premises. It was a big demand from some of the biggest customers in the world, without naming names, who are early adopters of Sentinel very early in the piece. So we're excited to deliver it. And by the way, as you'd imagine, Microsoft is running it's obvious, right? But we're running our SecOps directly on top of Sentinel, as are a number of the biggest customers in the world. There are more than 10,000 customers using Sentinel at this point at petabytes and petabytes of volume, which is super exciting. And by the way, on the data side, one of the areas that we're investing in a more forward-looking sense is in searching across data anywhere. And so today, I just described it. You can search in log analytics store. You can look at historical data. You can look at basic logs. Those are two things that we've introduced in the last month or two to supplement the log store. We're also really extending it to data wherever it lives. And so the first example of that is our Synapse, which is our big data store. You're able to analyze data in the future in Synapse without moving it anywhere. And we will extend this approach so that, you can aggregate data in Sentinel and work on top of that. And then there's multiple kind of price points and multiple features associated with various stores there. But you can also actually look at data where it sits, which for governance reasons, cost reasons, and so on is also a really interesting model. So we're excited to be innovating in that space.
I think one of the questions like our clients and people ask us a lot is, any recommendations around when to add and layer endpoint technologies and when to replace certain things? And specifically, like if you ask a pen tester or a researcher, they're going to tell you don't pull off a traditional AV and replace it with an EDR solution. Yeah. If you talk to the vendors, they're going to tell you, yes, you can get rid of everything and just use their stuff. So what is Microsoft's take on, if we're talking about Defender? We were having a kind of a side chat about the Sysmon, and is that an integration? So what is your guidance on whether an organization what all could this replace, and what do they need to keep layered on?
Yeah, it makes sense. So firstly, on your EPP and EDR or AV and EDR conversation, I guess I would say, and I'm being cheeky now, but all the good vendors have both of those capabilities together. And so, for example, Defender for Endpoint is both an EDR and an EPP. And so it has next generation antivirus, if you want to call it that. And it also has EDR in a single package these days. And so we've been working on where the use case requires two things, consolidating that use case. And so I gave the endpoint example, but we see a lot of customers obviously starting in different places. Some would start on using Defender for endpoints because they're refreshing OSs, or they have the need or desire to move off a vendor on the endpoint. We see some customers starting an email because they need protection for Office 365 email systems. Some customers start an identity. Wherever you start in terms of protecting on-premises AD, by the way, or protecting cloud AD, wherever you start, ultimately you're going to need to thread these other pieces together. And so one of the reasons why customers love our value proposition, and Ryan kind of hit on this before, is that we are honestly best of breed. We're in the Gartner MQ for endpoint as an example. I just shared the Sentinel stuff, I won't repeat it. But we are also integrated across the board. And so you can replace your endpoint stack, your identity stack, your email stack, and you probably don't have an enterprise IoT stack, and you may or may not have great cloud security. We do all of that in an integrated manner that is quite a bit more efficient than doing any individual piece in any other vendor. And in this game, as you folks have been pushing on me, the fastest that you can get a response, the fastest you can shut things down. And so there is absolutely a consolidation play here. You do not have to use all of this all at once. That's not a requirement. The more of it that you use, the more value you get, and you get to onboard it in whatever manner you please. Once again, Sentinel as our SIEM, it is our command and control for everything. On Microsoft 365 Defender, this is about protecting our end user environments. And as I just pointed out in the previous answer, it includes endpoint, identity, email, application, even enterprise IoT with network detection and response for things like routers and the like being added in there. It absolutely supports the diverse ecosystem, particularly on endpoints with all of the operating systems that you would expect, full EDR and EPP capabilities across all of those. It is not just about, Sentinel is more about fixing a problem, right? Microsoft 365 Defender is an XDR. It is not just about the right-hand side of the lifecycle in terms of detection and remediation and threat intelligence. It's also very centered in posture management. And so making sure that you have the right configurations up front so that you're reducing your attack surface, monitoring compliance, that's a key component of that. Obviously, those recommendations are informed by attacks. And then protecting across the life cycle. I could dive into each one of those blue boxes in tremendous detail on what they do. I did a very high level one just for endpoint. Obviously, an endpoint, one of the key things that we're working on here or continue to work on is auto remediation. The more that you can shut down an attack automatically in the tool, the better off you are. And that's what an XDR does because we understand that piece. Secure by default, the more that you can lock down up front the environment. Frankly, we love you security professionals on the line, but perhaps you have too many dials to twist in terms of getting things secure by default. And there's more that we can do to set some of those dials in advance for you. And so that's a really big area of emphasis for us. Obviously, we have to be careful about compatibility when we do that. You saw with Windows 11, perhaps we did that where we drew a line on what operating systems were supported based on security features, frankly, that would help protect the broader platform. So we're pushing the line on secure by default. The interaction with management is interesting. In many cases, the security folks and the IT folks get along just great. And so where we can integrate our tools into the management tools that customers use, that's a wonderful way of doing it. But in some cases, the security team needs to deploy their thing without having the management team, participate in the conversation. And we also enable that model in terms of enabling you get the security stuff out without requiring management. We're partnering with folks like Intel. We made an announcement a couple of weeks ago around hardware-based work. So they have some signals coming from their chips that are useful for determining ransomware scenarios. I think their technology is called ITDR. And so we're doing work there. And I could go on for hours, as I often do, on the quality of the work that we do in the endpoint category because it's such an important category. It's also insufficient for a customer to just protect their endpoints with an EDR or with an EPP. That would be my biggest message today. If you've already got an EDR or an EPP, make sure you're protecting applications, identities, and the like, because that's where attackers are going. And then on the other side is the infrastructure side. And this is the same thing. We have a very deep understanding, and because this looks very similar to the prior slide, I think your audience gets this. So I'm going to go to a little bit more detailed slide. We have a very deep understanding of individual resources on Azure and increasingly on AWS and GCP. And so we can actually view your security posture and create recommendations in a unified way across Azure, AWS, and GCP. It's all our own stuff. We're not relying on any of the GCP posture work or the AWS work. It's our security work that does that. And so you don't have to buy anything from them to enable that. And we can, of course, protect compute workloads, whether they're in AWS or GCP or Azure in terms of virtual machines and endpoints. But you can also protect Kubernetes. And today we have more native protection for resources in Azure than we do for the AWS and GCP workloads. However, you will see the boxes on the right continue to grow. It was probably 24 months ago when we realized the same work that we've been doing for some time on multi-platform, supporting every major client platform and server platform in the world, needed to happen in terms of cloud. As a security provider, great. I used to be an Azure guy, but I need to be able to protect AWS because that's where my customer is in GCP. So you'll see many more of the AWS and GCP workloads pop into this chart as we continue to innovate over the next period of time. And it'll start looking like the Azure one does in terms of the broad workloads.
Great that you have this integration with the cloud, with the Defender on-prem and all that. Do you working on, I would like to see like a feature request, centralized admin pane. So for example, one of our SOC engineers would find a hash and verify that this is legit and want to whitelist this or put this on an exception list, that you have one single interface that is doing this for the cloud protection, for the on-premise protection all at once, instead of having this to do in many different tools that have different exclusion mechanisms and so on.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And I will say that we have been on a journey which we've made substantial progress on in terms of consolidation of our experiences. And actually, I think we're quite a bit further ahead given the richness of our capabilities than many other folks out there. So we used to have a separate tool for endpoint, a separate tool for identities, a separate tool for applications. I could go on. And in the last 24 months, those have all consolidated into Microsoft 365 Defender, an integrated tool for end user environments. On the cloud side, it's all in Defender for Cloud, an integrated tool. And then obviously it comes together at the SOC. We will continue to push that convergence to enable SecOps to be more efficient. And actually with that as a segue, rather than me working on slides, how about I pass it off to Tim and he can actually show you where we're at in terms of the experience in a real attack scenario and what you would need to walk through.
So this is Microsoft 365 Defender. And to Scott's point, this is the sort of XDR end user experience where you see a lot of these workloads and traditional sort of siloed security domains coming together. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that we are split out between endpoints, email and collaboration, cloud apps, and identity is in there as well. So these are all your traditional products of Defender for Identity, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Endpoint. All of those capabilities and features and experiences and settings are all actually in this single portal now. So you can do all of that from one place, not just detection, but also investigation, and of course, response and remediation as well. So like Scott said, that journey of convergence, that journey of integrating not just the data, but also the speed and automation and ease with which you can address this stuff is really, really exciting. Scott talked a little bit about threat intelligence and just the volume of scary stuff that's out there. And I sit on our cross Microsoft team that tracks and tackles ransomware, and I completely agree. It's absolutely mind-blowing the amount of information and the development of these types of threats. And so I'll just show you quickly, like, this is where we elevate that. So, like Scott said, we have these sort of billions and billions of pieces of native data and information that we track and sort and analyze every single day. And that is here sort of visualized for customers within this experience. So I can come in, I can see different types of threats, I can see what my exposure is. And the most important part is it's actually going to tell me what I can do to mitigate and reduce my exposure to those threats. So I talked about ransomware. Let's search for ransomware, and then we can have a look at what ransomware looks like from a threat perspective, we've got all this information, analyst reports, summaries that we can share with the entire organization about how ransomware works, what these bad actors are traditionally looking for and how they tend to operate. So great for building that sort of culture of security, harping back to sort of zero trust and MFA and assume breach that we touched on earlier in the session. This one's really cool because I actually don't have any impacted devices, which is great. That's exactly sort of what we want to see, and good for my secure score, which if you saw on the homepage was not very good because we throw all kinds of things at this environment. But let's take a look at an incident. So we'll switch across to the incident scene. And this is where we see all of these correlated combined incidents from across our M365 world. And this is really interesting because we might have those hundreds and thousands of alerts that have been reduced down to just a handful of combined sort of incidents. And in the old days with kind of traditional, very, very separated teams and products that would work on each workload within security, you know, it might take you weeks or months to figure out that these seemingly unrelated alerts were actually, you know, very much the same attack, or you might never figure it out. So your time to detection, let alone your time to response, is way out there. So with XDR, obviously being able to remove that, being able to in real time piece these together is very, very critical. We can see here these impossible travel alerts that this must be Scott signing in from multiple countries around the world. But we will address this initial access incident. So an incident in XDR looks like this. I can see immediately I have impacted devices, users, and mailbox. So right, that's 3 different workloads within security. That's 3 different places within my ecosystem that I have alerts coming from. We can see them here. I have workstations, I've got end users, I've got email accounts. I can see exactly what the alerts were coming from each of those places. And they're also mapped immediately to the MITRE alert tactics. So we saw it in the title, but here we see it highlighted again. We have 10 attempted initial access techniques being utilized. And back to AI or ML, as we like to call it as well, we can also see that it's identifying, hey, this looks and smells like ransomware. I'm going to put this ransomware tag here in the incident so we can sort by that as well. We can very, very quickly find what's going on in relation to the different types of alerts and incidents we are worried about today. I don't need to go out to any of these different products or portals to address that like I might have had to do in the past. All of these are unified in the experience here, and just you can click through and see what those alerts were, what actually happened at each level of the investigation. And just to quickly show what has actually happened here, we have this evidence and response tab where I can see, hey, here's every single little piece of data that has been correlated and fused together to give me this sort of holistic view of the incident. Some of these things were suspicious, some were malicious. And what's really cool is most of these were prevented. So they've automatically been stopped. They haven't even come in the front door, which is obviously what we want. Some of the ones that did have been automatically blocked. My portal is doing something weird, but you would normally see remediated in there. And that would say, hey, this has been automatically responded to. For example, you know, a user has been blocked from the system. Next time they log in, they'll have to do MFA, they'll have to do password reset. An email has been quarantined. If there's some PowerShell or some malicious script that's been inserted into the ecosystem, it's been quarantined, it's been blocked, it's been removed. So really neat when you can come in and see, hey, there's actually nothing I have to do here. There's no human interaction required. Everything bad in this instance has been blocked. Really cool to be able to see, hey, this is how this thing got in, this is how it worked. And as you're dealing with some of these incidents that might have 500 or 600 different alerts, it becomes quite difficult to actually, you know, visualize that. So to be able to see on the graph, hey, this was your entry point, this was your identity that was breached, or this was your RDP port that was left exposed out in the cloud. That was your entry point. From there, it spread. It went to a device, it went to a user. You had some kind of privilege escalation, and you can see exactly how that spread has happened. Click through and investigate any one of those as well. And just finally, we talked a lot about endpoint. It's really cool to sort of be able to dive in into the endpoint side, see your device inventory, see, hey, what devices do I have in there that are, exposed or might have some kind of misconfiguration or vulnerability, and be able to fix those here from the dashboard as well. We've also very recently added IoT devices here too. Is my printer up to something it shouldn't be? Is my connected fish tank somehow infrastructure and sending petabytes of data across the world in the middle of the night? I want to see that here. I'd want to know about that and be able to resolve it. Final thing, and then I will hand you back to Scott. We talked a little bit about hunting. You can hunt any alert, any incident here as well. And the really nice thing is that you can write a query once, either in M365 Defender or in Sentinel, and query in multiple places. So querying my hot data, my real-time information here in XDR, move across to Sentinel, and someone asked the question earlier about legacy data, cold storage. That's where I might think, hey, we've recognized this new type of attack, this new strain of ransomware. Am I in a pre-ransomware phase? Am I in a vulnerable position? Has this been sitting here for 6 months or 6 years? Let's take that same query, run it across all that information at the Sentinel layer, and see where we stand. So very, very quick crash course, but really exciting to have this sort of portal coming together. And as Scott mentioned, just can't talk enough about the automation and integration of these platforms, being able to do everything from these sort of unified portals.
So definitely you don't have the Defender EDR client running on EDR devices. So what are the information points that you can gather here for IoT devices, and where are these logs coming from?
You're right. And so in fact, we protect both to your point, printers that you can't throw an agent on in the IoT sense. And we also protect OT devices. And so, the famous pipeline attacks that have various OT devices attacks, PLCs and other industrial units, many of which are running, very legacy software and are not things that people can, firmware upgrade to the latest anything. And so to protect those devices, we use network detection and response. We're effectively sniffing packets on the wire and then doing threat analytics based on those. That's how we protect that information.
And just to elaborate, so this is for on-premise IoT. If you have a lot of things in cloud environments, so making up in Azure, you would have some containers that are running. Can you tap into the VNets as well and get these informations out for example, containers where you don't have an agent on the system yet?
The short answer is you're exactly right. The attack surface for if you're building a new IoT project, as opposed to you have legacy infrastructure, which is we were just talking about, then you will often be building a new device, and you can take advantage of, you'll either use RTOS or Linux or our Secure Core OS, whatever, I forgot the name of it. I should know it, Azure something, as your operating system on the client. But your attack surface in IoT is not just on the device, it's also on the infrastructure side. And so you have, that's often sending data to Azure, and there's an app that's running in Azure on a container. And one of the beauties of our system in Defender for Cloud is you can protect all of that ecosystem in one place. And so we absolutely will protect the container from threats. We'll protect the database from threats, MariaDB, Postgres, SQL, whatever it is. We will protect the network traffic from threats. We'll also give you configuration best practices on the things to do to make sure that that's set up in a correct way. And in that case, often you can put an agent on the client if you're building your own IoT client. And so often the richness of the data that you can get in that scenario from the devices is even higher. But yeah, we really treat the patient holistically when it turns out in an IoT sense. It's not just the end device, it's the entire cloud infrastructure plus the device that we protect.
Okay.
The example you showed us was an alert I didn't need to worry about because it was automatically taken care of. I would like to see, what an alert that actually has to be investigated looks like, and what we do rather than the stuff I can ignore because it's already been handled.
What the steps would be to kind of go through that process.
From a visual and UI perspective, it would look very, very similar. As you dive into the alerts and the incident, the ones that do need remediation, a lot of them will actually suggest what you need to do. You have a lot of occasions where there might be some kind of policy or business policy where the system could well remediate this for you, but it needs some kind of human approval to go and do it. So you would see like a panel come out that says, hey, you need to do this, check the box, approve, remediate. And I forget the statistic off the top of my head, but it's upwards of 80 or 90% of things that can and are generally at least stopped or remediated on your behalf. And as I said, a lot of the ones that need intervention is often because of the business policy. So, hopefully another time we can dive into that in more detail. But like I said, UI perspective, very, very similar. A lot of suggestions are given to you, and then it's sort of a click and follow your nose through the investigation to resolve.
Awesome.
Yeah, and actually, just if I may, a couple of things that I saw in the demo. So firstly, the incidents that Tim showed you, he could close an incident there, and it would also close it in the SIEM tool. So he was in the XDR, but he can close the incident there, and it's automatically closed in the SIEM tool. So there's no duplicity there. There's just a specialized UI. The other thing, the question on how quickly do we update the threat intelligence? If you were super perceptive in the threat analytics view, there was, I think it was called Dev 537. You may have seen us do a blog on Microsoft security yesterday on Dev 537. I know there was commentary on Slashdot this morning. So just real data to show how quickly that is immediately into the product.
With previous tools, I've had features like, I'm just asking if you have these sort of features, but I've had features like I can take the incident, put it in its own little investigation, maybe combine some incidents that maybe are related, and then also tag people that I would say, maybe I'm more of a junior person, I need to escalate something. Would it be, I would have to, put it through the ticketing system to tag the right people, or would it have a feature that I can bring in the right people to investigate that specific incident?
Yeah, you can 100% do that from the incident and or the alert view. So to your first point, a lot of the tags are applied automatically. You can apply new tags, you can make your own tags, and then in terms of assigning it to people, you can assign an entire incident to a user, or you can do it at the alert layer as well. And you can do that in terms of, I need you to fix this, or I need you to have awareness of this. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that, but it's very, very straightforward to do it at either the incident or the individual alert level.
Yeah, and just building on that, you can do that both natively inside our tools, and if your company requires the use of a ticketing tool like Service One, that works too.